So welcome, Lottie, to the Agriton podcast. My name is Martyn Richards. For people that don't know me, firstly, apologies for the sunglasses today, but for once we've got the sun actually shining on us. So Lottie, you've brought this contraption, I'm going to call it to begin with, because you're going to do explanation for me. But I've heard lots of stuff about biochar. I don't know much about it, so this is a bit of education for me. Lottie, can you introduce yourself and your company and this amazing product?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Lottie. I'm one of the co-founders of Earthly Biochar. And about 6 years ago, we started a business to try and design a biochar kiln so that people can make biochar at home. And we've been selling these around the world for the last 3 years. And today I'm going to set it alight, show you how to make some biochar and explain how it works in the soil.
Cool. So as a company, why did you start thinking about biochar, and what do you see the benefits in the future?
Oh, we absolutely just fell into it. Me and my co-founder belong to the Permaculture Society. We went along to a meetup and we met somebody who told us all about biochar. That's the first time I'd heard of it. That was in 2017. And it's relatively unheard of still in the horticulture and agriculture world. And the chap who told us about it wanted a way to make it himself. So we decided that maybe there is an option out there. Can you buy a biochar kiln? And we were doing research online and we found amazing videos from about 700 people showing you how to make different styles of biochar kilns, right from primitive methods through to high-tech methods. But there was nothing that you could buy in the UK at the time to make it yourself at home. So that spiraled into a business idea. We won some funding from the Princess Trust and we got it off the ground. Then we won more funding from Innovate UK, and now we manufacture them in Wales, all made by hand, so all made in the UK, and we sell them worldwide.
So the obvious thing, I'm looking at this piece of metal and I need to understand a little bit about how biochar actually becomes biochar, because I'm looking at what we have in here and this looks like wood chip to me.
Yeah, it is wood chip.
So how do you make this into biochar?
So the key is using dry wood chip from a hardwood. So this will be oak and ash. The reason being is that it's very porous and those pores and that cell structure remains in the biochar, which gives biochar its properties. And you'll bake it in a kiln like this at roughly 600 to 800 degrees. It has to be quite high in temperature. That drives off most of the elements and volatiles. So you're left with almost a pure carbon biochar. And that's really porous, and the trick is to do it in a low oxygen environment, so there's very little oxygen in the burn chamber when it gets going, because if you had oxygen entering, it will turn to ash. So it's quite different to a bonfire, which in the open air with plenty of oxygen, all the wood turns to ash. When you remove oxygen from the equation, you get this char left behind. So that's it in a nutshell. Cool.
I mean, I'm looking at obviously inside and I see the holes on the top. Mm-hmm. I've also seen solo stoves. Do they work in a similar kind of way in respects to smoke? Because my problem with this, I'm looking at this thinking, well, firstly, there's a lot in here. There's a lot of wood chip in here. Do you just literally light it? Is that what you're going to do next?
Yeah, I'll show you. And in terms of like the style and the design, it's called a top-lit updraft kiln, which is the same style as solo stove.
Yep.
And other kind of low carbon wood stoves. And the trick with that is that you introduce some preheated oxygenated air at the top above the burn, because that acts as a pilot flame and it burns off methane, so you don't get any smoke. So that's like an more sustainable way.
Can we pull it out for the viewers so they can actually see what's in it? So
it's these holes at the top that is where the high oxygenated and hot air will fly in, and it comes up between these two walls. And at the top here, smoke will be being produced, but because the hot air hits it, it ignites, and when you burn smoke, you're burning methane into water and CO2, so it's much cleaner.
Okay.
That's how it works.
Cool. So how do we light it?
I will show you. So I use these eco fire lighters. They're just made of wood shavings covered in wax. And you need a few, and you want to space them out evenly. Otherwise you'll have a lopsided burn, and then you'll have like one half that will get to the bottom first, and that will be char, and what's left behind on the other half that may not have caught up yet will still be wood.
So how far does a wood chip go down in respects to the unit?
To about here.
Okay, so it is literally full.
Yeah, it's full. Yeah, makes a good yield. And it's, like I said, a top lit updraft kiln. So it's a batch process. So that means that I can light it and leave it. I don't have to touch it until it's time to put it out. Whereas continuous processes like Kentucky kilns and pit kilns, which are usually pits dug out of the earth, you're continuously fueling them.
Okay.
So it's a bit simpler
Cool.
to use.
Right, let's have a look.
Yes. This is the hardest part, lighting it without burning yourself.
So while you're doing that, obviously my understanding, I've got a log burner at home, and all I get is a load of ash at the bottom.
Yep.
And the problem is with ash, as you know, a little bit is okay for the soil, but obviously, yeah, if you put too much on there, then you're just going to choke it up. So what's the difference between what you have in a log burner compared to using a biochar kiln?
So in a log burner, you're not restricting the oxygen, so it gets probably just as hot, maybe not as hot, but because there'll be a lot of oxygen in there, that's why you're producing ash. And also the other point is that log burners, you tend to keep having to add fuel to it. So you might start with a nice pile of logs, and as it burns down, you'll keep adding more to keep it going. So this fire works like in the inverse. So you start it at the top and it goes through the fuel, which we'll see in a moment.
Cool, there's a lot of heat already on that.
I'm gonna pop this on, and then I'll carry on answering your question.
Cool.
So this is a flame concentrator, and the purpose of this is just to direct all of the heat out the flue, and it produces a draft, so it kind of gets the fire going and it keeps the temperature nice and high. If this wasn't on there, with a gust of wind, the fire could get knocked out and then you end up with smoke. So it's really important to use something like this on top.
And all these parts obviously come as a whole kit, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So it's all lit, but I also see some accessories that haven't been put into the equation. So can you talk through the other bits that you get with a stove?
Yeah, sure. So you get this, which I call the top hat.
That's really pretty.
Yeah, this pattern is the structure of biochar under an electron scanning microscope.
Oh, cool.
So we took it from nature, and it goes on here. And the purpose of this is so that you can then put a cooking grate on top.
And I was going to ask, because obviously with this is, you know, it's nice to be able to utilise what you're putting into it, but also it'd be nice to utilise the heat that's available in it. So
it makes it a bit more sustainable rather than wasting the heat. So these bits go together.
Yep.
And then I think that's the right way around. Yep. And then they sit. Wait, I just need to make sure I don't drop this into the fire.
Nice and hot.
That's it.
Yeah. That one in.
Perfect.
Cool. And then you can put a kettle or whatever on,
whatever
on top.
you fancy.
Cool.
Yeah, we could have a barbecue.
Do you know what? Yeah, that looks cool. So I've got the obvious thing for me is that that's quite a simple process. Just explain a little bit about the wood chip, because obviously I'm looking at the wood chip. I know a little bit about wood chip and I understand that it's a hardwood. If I went to, you know, my local tree surgeon, what am I actually looking for to fuel this?
Good question. So my partner's a tree surgeon, and the number one thing is you want it to be dry, and fairly large. So some wood chippers will actually shred the wood and it'll be quite small. That won't work very well in this kiln, because what it'll do is it will compact down quite a lot and it will reduce airflow. So you want a larger chip. If you can get chip that's just been produced that day from a single species of tree, so if they were taking out ash trees because of ash dieback, that'd be fantastic.
Yep.
And what I do is I lay it out in the sun on a tarp, and that gets it really nice and dry before I use it. Because if you popped it in now, just as we had, we'd be getting loads of steam and smoke coming off, because when the wood's wet, it means the temperature doesn't get up so quickly, so you end up with more smoke. And as you can see at the moment, there's pretty much no smoke.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, you know, I was expecting, obviously with it being so compacted, that we would just get a load of smoke to begin with, and since it's been lighting, you know, obviously we've only been going sort of 5 minutes on there, but but it's not smoking at all. So for me, when I looked at biochar as a system, my issue was usual commercialisation. Are people going to grow trees just to make biochar? And obviously, is there anything out there that we can utilise in the future, which could help manage systems. So have you had any experience with things like rhododendrons, etc., where they've used that to chip it and then utilize it in those systems? Or is it just, does it have to be a specific wood that you need to use?
No, it doesn't have to be a specific wood, and in fact it can be something that is not wood as long as it's a form of
okay.
biomass. But I do know a farm that cleared out loads of rhodies from their woodlands and they use that to make biochar, so I know that makes an effective biochar. But some really nice sustainable systems around the world are in Austria. So you have a plant there that has a really high-tech system. It's a continuous pyrolysis system, so it has a feed hopper, and they put through theirs olive stones, fruit stones, grain husks and fruit pulp. And that still makes a really good quality biochar at the end. And in Europe, we have a certificate that standardises the quality of biochar, so they meet the highest standard with that feedstock. And then there's Sweden. So Sweden have a municipal biochar plant, and they take all of the citizens' green waste and they turn that into biochar, and then the citizens can go back and pick up the biochar for free.
Wow, okay.
So that's really fun. But yeah, pretty much anything that was once living biomass. I have a restaurateur in London who makes biochar out of the kitchen bones that come out of the kitchen waste. So it doesn't have to be timber, and I agree, we definitely should not be growing feedstock to make biochar, except in one case where I think it is sustainable, and that's if you're growing a fast rotation crop.
Yep.
Like a compost crop or a willow, because it's actually harvesting the carbon as it grows and then you're storing it in the biochar when you make it.
Yeah.
As long as it's not displacing food production or causing any other environmental damage, I think that's an acceptable feedstock.
Yeah, and again, it's my own interpretation of, you know, you look at something like this, and unfortunately in the society we live in, commercialisation will never happen with these kind of things. But what I like about this is that you know, it is a small compact unit. It can be utilised very efficiently. But how long does it take to actually then make the biochar? So we've only been going for 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, I timed it. We started at 5 to 12.
Yep.
It'll be 1 hour. So
okay.
in 1 hour's time, I need to start looking for a change in the flame colour and size.
Yep.
If the flame gets smaller and goes more blue, I know that we've almost got to the bottom, and that's when I'd quench it and put it out. So it's about a 1 hour process.
So quite a quick process
in
respects to, obviously a little bit of preparation, we're making it dry, etc. But you know, obviously, you know, in an hour's time, we've got something that can be used. When it's made, how quickly can I use it?
Straight away.
Okay.
So you need to take it out the kiln, which we'll do later, wait for it to cool down. It doesn't take very long to cool down. And then you want to activate it or inoculate it, and I'll talk through different ways of doing that, but essentially you're adding nutrients and microbial activity to the biochar.
Yep.
It acts as a sponge, so it's going to absorb all of those things, and then you can add it to your compost and start planting with it.
Okay.
If you didn't activate or inoculate it, when you add it to soil, it will have a bit of a priming effect, and you'll want to leave it about 4 to 6 weeks for it to then absorb the nutrients and the microbial activity before planting in it.
Yeah.
But by shortcutting it and doing the activation yourself, you can use it the same day.
So what can you inoculate it with?
Loads of different things. My favourite method is a compost tea.
Yeah.
So you can make your own compost tea or fermented plant juice. That's going to be really rich in nutrients, especially if you actually do ferment it. So if it's fermented and I use a pond pump with an air stone so it bubbles it, I get a really active compost tea full of microbial life. That's a really good method. If you're doing that, you just soak the biochar in it in a big Hessian sack, so it's like a giant tea bag.
Yep.
Or you can put it in your own compost bin at home. So when you take your food waste out from your kitchen, every time you add to your compost pile or your garden waste, just chuck a bit of biochar on there. As the compost is breaking down, it's going to be providing the nutrients and microbial activity for the biochar to absorb. So it does kind of the mixing process for you.
Cool.
I also sell a freeze-dried powder that's made up of mycorrhizal fungi, humic acid, bacteria and some trace elements, and that you dilute in water. So you could pour that over your biochar. I think people just have a go at pretty much anything living, full of nutrients, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing is we're talking about something that's, we're talking about nature for the first thing. Mm-hmm. Nothing is clinical when it comes to nature, and also you know, when you're inoculating things, you will start to learn a bit more about how you can utilize it in your own system, because every system is different. The thing I love about this kind of system though is that it's actually a very easy DIY. I appreciate there's a cost involved in respects to that. Have you done any kind of analysis in respects to the benefits I get from this, buying equipment, because obviously there's a value in that, compared to buying commercial kind of products? Does biochar give you that much of an advantage? And is it the length of time that you can use the biochar? Is it a short stead, or does it continue to feed the soil?
Yeah, so to answer your first bit, the kiln is £800, but you'll make £50 of biochar in it every time you use it. So our kilns are guaranteed for 5 years, but we reckon they'll last 10, and they're all modular. So you're going to make your money back pretty quickly if you buy it and make it yourself versus buying biochar. And then biochar is an amazing product which is stable carbon, so when it goes into the soil it doesn't break down. So it's a one-time application. So if this was your garden, you'd put biochar in your beds once and then you don't have to add it again.
What, forever?
Forever. The oldest
Okay.
piece of biochar that's ever been found was carbon dated to 4,000 years old.
Wow.
It actually comes from the Amazon rainforest, which is an incredible story in itself. But yeah, it's inert carbon, microbes can't digest it, it will stay there. We believe, kind of with modern science, that it's on a centennial scale, so between kind of 800 and 1,000 years in fairly active soil. And that's one of the reasons why it's a form of carbon storage, which is mentioned in the Paris Agreement. So if you're making biochar, you're actually locking up that carbon for good, and it's not going to be oxidized by microbes, and it won't be going back into the atmosphere. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and this is, I have a personal issue with carbon credits, just because there's no standardization, etc.
Yeah.
But this sounds like we're on a better version of actually capturing carbon in respects to the process. And what I like about it is that you've already gone through a process, i.e. the tree has captured some of that, and then you're then storing it as a system that can then utilize to feed the soil to then capture more carbon in that system. The thing that I'm still getting my head around is it's an inert product, and then you then inoculate it.
Yeah.
So as a company, we obviously sell microorganisms. How do those microorganisms survive in that system? How do because there's no food sources for them?
No. So because you're going to be inoculating your biochar and then adding it to soil, the organic carbon that they would be ingesting, their food source, is already in the soil, and the biochar is really porous, so all of the pores that are on the outside of that kiln, they're slightly negatively charged.
Yep.
And water and some nutrients are positively charged, so it acts like a mini magnet, and the way I describe it is that it's like a microbe hotel. So without biochar, you're going to have nutrient runoff, your soils are going to dry out, you're going to have less available water for your microbes. If you add biochar in there, it's going to hold on to all of those things. So it in itself does not feed microbes, but it provides a really nice environment for them to thrive.
And I definitely understand that. We sell EM, we don't create a system, we just nurture that system.
Yeah.
So it's a very similar, and we were discussing earlier on that I'm going to give you some EM because I'm really interested to see how that microbe activity works in it. So we've talked about obviously how it works, we've talked about how to make it. How much do I put in my soil?
You only need a small amount, so biochar is quite potent. The recommended application rate quoted by the European Biochar Certificate and many academics is about 10% by volume.
Yep.
So if you're adding 200 litres of shop bought or homemade compost to your beds, you would add 20 litres of biochar. So it's 10%, or 9 parts compost, 1 part biochar. And like I said, it doesn't break down, so you could either do that all in one go and never have to go back again, or you could do it in stages.
Cool.
And just keep track of what you're adding.
Yeah. Can you put too much in?
You can in some soils and some plants. So biochar, like you'll find with EM, when you're growing, everything's really context specific. So it depends what you're growing, the environment and the soil. If you've got really sandy soils, you can increase that amount because those sandy soils will already be struggling with holding on to water. But if you had soils that were already very good at holding on to water and nutrients, putting too much in there might mean that you reduce drainage. So a little bit of common sense, knowing your soil, do some trials. I think I've spoken to some growers who grow alpine plants and cacti, and they've ranked it right up to 50% biochar.
Okay,
they're in
that's
hot
quite different.
houses,
Yeah, fair enough.
That's a really specific growing context. in fairly fertile UK soils, 10% works really well. And if you're going to put more in, you might just actually be shouldering an economic cost rather than any benefits. So I would just stick with the 10%.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing, is if you had a lot of waste material, there is an opportunity for people to utilise in their own gardens, etc. And obviously being a circular economy, it's a nice bit of trading as well. You obviously can trade things, etc. Yeah. And I think this is the thing with biochar and general understanding of burning things is burning equals smoke, smoke equals greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
What in respects to greenhouse gases, and we're just going to make it nice and general so everyone can understand what gases are being released here and what's the impact in the environment.
Sure. So this kiln only emits CO2 and water, and CO2 is a greenhouse gas. But the alternative is that if you didn't have a pilot flame in there, you'd be producing methane. And methane is 32 times more potent and damaging to the environment than CO2. So it's still going to emit some carbon, but actually compared to just burning your wood on a bonfire, it's a much cleaner burn where there's no smoke and no methane.
So the output of this biochar is carbon. CO2 is obviously carbon and oxygen.
Yeah.
Has there been any studies in respects to the CO2 versus the carbon? So what's the difference in are you gaining more doing it this way or less doing it this way?
So you're gaining less. So if anyone wanted to look it up, they need to look up the pyrolysis carbon cycle.
Yep.
And that illustrates exactly what's happening in this kiln. So when you add your feedstock, that's 100% of your carbon. And then when you light it under pyrolysis with a really low oxygen environment, 50% of that carbon will be released as CO2 and 50% will remain stored in the biochar.
Okay.
So if you did it on a bonfire, 100% will go up into the atmosphere as CO2. So you're effectively storing half of the carbon that was in the feedstock in the wood in an inert form that can then go into the soils.
So again,
Keep
I'm
going.
going to play devil's advocate because I need to be sold in this. I'm nearly here. I'm nearly there.
Okay.
My problem is now I'm looking at wood chip and I'm thinking, right, I could take this wood chip and I could just decompose it.
Yep.
Why would I want to make a biochar when I could actually then just shove it on the soil and let soil food web do the work?
So if you took the same wood chip and decomposed it in the soil, the carbon would be oxidated by the microbes and they will be released through respiration as CO2. So if you're looking at it from a sustainability perspective, decomposing organic matter releases almost all carbon back into the atmosphere. Over a long period of time, you build up stable forms of carbon as aggregates in the soil, but that really does take centennial scales. So soil organic matter can take decades to build up, but if you added all of that wood chip to your compost bin or your soil, most of that carbon, like 98%, is going to be oxidized and go into the atmosphere through decomposition. This way you save half of that carbon into the biochar. So you're got about a 50% saving of carbon that's being locked up in the biochar. And I also would add that it's not an all or nothing or either or. So I'm a believer in realising that things can work together. So I would be adding biochar and homemade compost, that decomposition is fueling your microbial activity. You need that, but you can still add the biochar in there as a good carbon store and to hold on to water and nutrients for them. So you just mix them together.
And this is, this fits very nicely with us as a company, and for us, Bokashi is retaining carbon, retaining nutrients, etc. And I can see how this really fits with it. But it's nice to hear from a company's point of view is that this is not a silver bullet.
Oh, no.
Obviously, with all these kind of systems, you hear when people get excited about things, you hear a lot more about it. And I have been hearing a lot about biochar. It's been very active conversation because it's something shiny and something new, etc. But I've also heard a lot of preaching going on with biochar. But it's nice to hear that obviously you believe the same as me, that actually nature is full of different systems and actually they all need to work together. So I want to see you obviously develop and grow as a company. Can you just tell me more of an insight of the company and where you see yourself in the future, and also where you see the future of biochar?
Yeah, sure. So the company actually is inspired by trying to help people make biochar. There are plants around the UK and around the world that sell biochar, but from a sustainability perspective, if you've got the feedstock and the means to make it, it's better for the environment to make it yourself, because otherwise you're just shipping that feedstock and that biochar to you, and there's loads of carbon emissions released in that process. It's also really costly to buy biochar. So our goal is to help people make it, and biochar came from the Amazon rainforest. It was probably a practice at least 500 years old, but largely the populations today that still make biochar in the global south make it in fairly smoky systems. So our goal is to actually take technology like this and make it affordable and accessible, and even give them a way to make kilns like this of their own, so that they can be making biochar without producing smoke, because not only is smoke bad for the planet, but it's really bad for their long-term respiratory health.
Yeah.
We've been to Ghana, we've noticed how farmers over there are making biochar, and they will be standing under the shade of trees. They'll be using traditional pit kilns, so they'll be digging pits in the earth and then loading up the kiln with biochar, and they'll be under the shade to keep cool, but then the smoke gets trapped in that little area as well, and then they're just inhaling so much smoke, and they could be doing it for like 6 hours a day.
Wow.
And that's just terrible for them.
Yeah.
So it's taking kilns like this that are cleaner, trying to give them ways to make it with the tools and kind of the waste metal that they have available, so that they can produce biochar in a way that's better for them and for the environment.
Yeah, and I think this is the key thing, and where we, definitely get on is that, first, we don't want to import water when we're importing our products, and we try and educate people. But obviously there are people that don't want to do these kind of things, and it's nice that you have that scale as well. So your company love that idea of being able to make things. What about biochar? What's especially with research, like, a lot of people are not convinced on this yet. There's still, obviously, would you agree, early infancy in respects of research, or is there enough research to say this is definitely a positive more than a negative?
There's definitely enough research out there. So there's roughly 30,000 research papers published on biochar. I'm doing a PhD at the moment, and my literature review has found that it's not that people aren't convinced, it's that they get caught up in the definition of what biochar is.
Okay.
And also, when you're explaining biochar, context is so key. So if I explained it to you and this was your vegetable garden, what I'd be teaching you would be completely different to taking it to a potato farmer who's using loam soil or sandy soils. So biochar needs to be adapted for the system that you're using, and the research papers at the moment don't really have a clear categorization of the biochars.
Yeah.
So that's actually something that I'm trying to unpick and untangle with my research, is everybody who made biochar at this temperature in this way, what were the properties? And when that biochar was used in this type of soil with this environment and this climate, then what happened? And at the moment, it is a tangled mess. Like, you'll go onto the web of science and you'll just get so many research papers up, and you have to go through and unpick it all and see, is that relevant to me? Is that biochar the type of biochar I can make or be buying? I'm
really interested in this now, because this is a bit you haven't explained. So you're telling me that actually it's not a one size fits all then?
No, not at all.
Okay, right. So explain that to the viewers.
Okay.
You're telling me, so I can't just take my green waste, or I don't know, my rhododendrons, etc., and put it into all types of soil? Is that what you're saying? Or?
No, sorry. To be clear, what I'm saying is what you make the biochar from influences its porosity.
Right.
So the biochar that I might sell you or you might make will be probably made with wood chip or hardwood. That would be very porous. If you made biochar from miscanthus grass, it won't be very porous, just because its cell structure, it grew really quickly, it doesn't have beautiful rings like wood does. So the lack of porosity would mean you might have to add a bit more. And then on top of that, what you're growing and where you're growing it also matters. So when I say it's not one size fits all, what I mean is, and it's really hard because there's not many great analogies, but biochar is like a family of materials.
That makes sense.
You're going to have temperature that affects the porosity, feedstock does. The way it's made affects how clean the pores are, whether they've got tars in them or whether they're completely cleaned out. And then how it's used, so is it inoculated or not? Every single stage in that will affect the performance of that product. So I try and explain biochar a bit like if you were going into Jewson's or any building merchants and you want to go and buy plywood, you're going to get different sizes. You're going to get a soft ply or hard ply. You then might use it differently in your building. So it's just taking a step back. And another way of putting it is that biocharing is a process. It in itself can be adapted and the outcome can be different as well. So that's why I think outside of academia, biochar is in its infancy because the communication of it hasn't caught up with what the academics are publishing.
Yeah.
So they're publishing very specific papers on biochars made at 900 degrees that are only at 900 degrees for 10 minutes. That biochar might then be quenched with water and steam, so it's very clean. They might inoculate it with a specific nutrient and then use it in a rice paddy in China. And the results are they get a 20% increase in yield. That's totally irrelevant to me here. But the communication isn't there yet. So it's just figuring out how do we explain something that is living in a natural system. You've got to be respectful of that.
And this is the problem that we have as a society, especially in the UK, is that we are governed by larger companies that go, this is the product, this is what we're planting, this is the yield, this equals that. And as you know, well, we're standing here with sunglasses on, we didn't think we were going to be just standing here with sunglasses on. Mother Nature doesn't work like that. So, you know, we come from, so as a company, we deal with, you know, farmers are trying to be regenerative, but actually, you know, Mother Nature is getting in the way. It's not getting in the way, we just haven't learned how to utilise what we're doing. And that's what I like to hear from your side, is that you're not trying to just say, this is the one size fits all kind of scenario. You're actually thinking about, you know, how can we help? So can people, if someone bought a kiln for you, could I get advice from you in respect to how it works, etc.?
Somebody who called me a couple of weeks ago from Ireland who got a kiln. People call me all the time, or you can email me. I also do demonstrations, so if you're unsure about buying a kiln, come along to one of those. You can see it working.
Is that on your website?
Yes, on my website and social media.
Cool. And I think this is the thing, is that, and we have the same problem with bokashi. Most people, when I talk about bokashi, go food waste. And that's what you see a lot of, especially in Eastern culture. It's more adaptive. But then I talk about green waste and farmyard manure, and they look at me like I'm speaking a different language. And the problem that we have, you know, as a company, which is you're having the same problem, is that the internet obviously is full of information. It's lovely to have that all of information, but sometimes the specific stuff is not there. And it's nice to hear as a company that people can come to you and obviously ask for advice, because for us as a company, we, you know, I spend most of my time speaking to one person, as much as I love to speak to just 100 people all the time, but actually it's really important to make sure that it's tailored and they utilize it, you know, for a longer period of time. So we've been talking about biochar, and I've seen biochar in its form. Looks very similar to charcoal. Can I not just put charcoal into the soil?
Not really. So there's three answers to that question, and I think it's a valid debate, so I'll explain them. To start with, charcoal that you might buy from a supermarket or a garden centre that's largely or large kind of production worldwide, if it's imported charcoal and it's designed for your barbecue, the process of shipping charcoal for insurance purposes means that as it leaves the country it's made, it needs to be doused with anti-flammable liquids, because otherwise they can't insure it.
I'm now getting my head around this. You're lighting it, and then before they can ship it, they have to make it so it doesn't set alight.
Yeah, so barbecue charcoal made from old growth forests, unfortunately generally Canadian, American, or even Russian, that charcoal can't be shipped without insurance if it's not covered in anti-flammable liquids, because it would be too high risk to ship it. When it reaches our ports, it will go through a process of being covered in petrochemicals, so that when you take a flame to it on your barbecue...
Is that why it smells?
It stinks.
Wow.
Charcoal shouldn't smell.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
okay.
So terrible for you. Like, you don't want to cook food on petrochemicals.
No.
Crazy. Terrible for the planet. So anyone watching, don't buy like large production barbecue charcoal. Buy it local, because local woodlands will be making it. They'll have to do it for the management of their trees, and that charcoal will not smell. It won't stink like petrol. It might have a slightly smoky smell to it, but it's a very distinct different smell to what petrol smells like. Still, in both cases, charcoal is generally made at 300 to 400 degrees C. Biochar needs to be made at above 660 degrees C if you want that high porosity performance. So as you increase the temperature, you're driving off more volatiles, which is why biochar really has no smell to it at all. When you make local charcoal from a woodland that's made in a more ethical and sustainable way, that smoky smell has some volatiles that are left on, and we like that. It tends to impart a flavour when we're cooking. But biochar needs to be made at a high temperature because those volatiles actually inhibit microbial activity. So you could, if you wanted to, buy woodland charcoal, crush it up into small pieces and put it in your soil.
Okay.
But the activity of the microbes will be inhibited compared to a cleaner biochar that has literally no volatiles left on it because it's being cooked at that much higher temperature.
So just on that point of taste, I'm a huge barbecue fan. So if I cook some items on this compared to cooking it on a something that I'm commercially going to buy, is the taste different?
Yeah, it will taste different. So we actually had a barbecue a couple of weeks ago from woodland charcoal that's made locally, and they use cherry wood, and you could really taste that.
Okay.
Also, I don't know if other people do this, when we barbecue we actually quite like to close it and let the smoke leave a flavour.
Yep.
Cooking on this, you've got no smoke, so you're not going to get that. And also, if it was cherry chip in there, you wouldn't notice it. It still cooks steak really nicely, or whatever you fancy barbecuing, but it won't leave that kind of traditional barbecue flavour on it.
That's fair enough. So that's number one. What you said you had another two?
Yeah, so number one is don't buy biochar in supermarkets and shops.
Yep.
Because of the petrochemicals.
Yeah, which is literally mind blowing for me. I've never even thought about that. Number
two is if you are going to buy barbecue charcoal, buy it local from woodlands. And number three is the temperature difference. So when you're making biochar at higher temperatures, you have a cleaner burn, no smoke is being produced, and you get a cleaner biochar out of it. So there's no volatiles left on there. The microbial activity is much higher. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. It's like a temperature scale. Like lower temperatures makes charcoal, higher temperatures makes biochar.
Okay, and I think this is the thing, is that the cooking bit can be part of the process. Obviously, from my point of view, I do like barbecue, and I do like the smoky smell. But I can now, my mind is literally blown by the whole thing, because actually, when you rush in a barbecue, I don't let it go white, and obviously, there's still quite a lot of black colouring on that. And actually, I'm now thinking that maybe I shouldn't be cooking. I maybe should leave it completely to go into that white thing. One of the things that I get in a company is that, did you invent EM? Did you invent biochar? Is this your technology? Is it something that's, No,
not at all. It's been around for a really long time. Some people say biochar is like the oldest thing you've never heard of. And I think that came from it being carbon dated to like 4,000 years old. But biochar originated in the Amazon rainforest to date, so allow ignorance, we only know what we know, right?
Yeah.
But journals were found of Spanish explorers that 500 years ago were exploring the Amazon, and they wrote down that they found, as they're travelling up the rivers, on the banks there were really healthy populations, large civilizations growing all their own food, kind of bigger than the size of London, so that puts it into scale. People went back 200-300 years later, and in their journals they don't find anyone. They just say there's really sparse, small nomadic populations.
Yeah.
So then in the 1980s, archaeologists wanted to find out if there was any real evidence. Were the first set of explorers imagining things? What was going on? And using planes and looking at the ground from above, they noticed in the Amazon basin really fertile rings and then very sparse, unfertile land with not much growth on it. And it was obviously man-made. So archaeologists and soil scientists actually went to those places of fertility, and they took soil cores, and they found in the soil that it was really, really dark and rich in carbon compared to 100 metres away where not much was growing. It was very sandy. And that again inferred that it was human activity. And so what we believe today is that the Amazonian civilizations were digging pits to deal with their human food and green waste.
Yeah.
They were lighting them and then covering them with earth. And when you do that, you would leave a small amount of space for some emissions to go out, but you're basically restricting all oxygen from going in there. So inadvertently, they were pyrolyzing everything.
Without even knowing it, probably.
Although they may have, that could be really ignorant. And they were making this high carbon content, charcoal rich soil, which microbial activity over time is going to love. So you have all these fertile rings that you can see from planes.
Yeah.
And that's when the term biochar came about. So it's quite a new word, but the ancient word for it is terra preta. So it has a name and an amazing rich history. So no, I didn't invent it, but it's been around for a really long time, but it's still relatively unheard of in this part of the world, although traction is changing and people are learning about it more. But yeah, I just got inspired by it and I wanted to help people make it themselves.
So I see in Japanese culture, they burn the wood for preserving.
Yeah, I've seen that.
You know, and for me, that's quite a cool thing of understanding, you know, what you're doing with a process, and maybe obviously in the future we'll think about, you know, utilising these ancient systems to preserve. And what I like about biochar and what I see the future with this is that actually, if we think about, you know, cooking, etc., and utilising it as a two-pronged attack more than anything else, there's some massive benefits for the customer. I really want to promote you now, so I want to make sure that people know where to find you, etc. So can you just give us a brief outline of where people can find you?
Yeah, sure. If you go onto Google and you search Biochar Kiln and then you put Earthly after it, so that's planet Earth with an LY on the end, you'll find our website. We're called Earthly Biochar. It's all dedicated to the kiln. You can learn about it, watch videos, etc. But we also have an Instagram account called Earthly Biochar, and I've got a personal one because I'm doing a PhD and I talk about my research, and that's called Biochar with Lottie. So you'll find loads.
Cool. So we're going to come back to this in
Half an hour?
half an hour,
Yeah.
and then we'll see what the result is.
Okay.
Okay, so we've come back about half an hour, so it's about an hour in total, roughly.
Actually, it's over. It's an hour and 20.
Okay, but obviously we didn't know exactly its nature in it, so it's not going to be an exact science. So really want to understand, obviously, the end results and you know, how to take it apart. So can you show us the process of taking it apart?
Yeah, sure. And I'll explain what happens when we put it out as well.
Cool.
So the first thing I'm going to do is take off the cooking grate.
So remind us what temperature this has got to.
I do have a temperature gun, but not with me, but it's usually between 600 and 800. If I put in really dry oak, it seems to get hotter. It's gone up to like 900 before, so it does get really hot. But it's been beautifully smokeless today.
Yeah,
like absolutely not a sign of it. Anyone can watch that video really carefully, they won't find any. So that tells me that the feedstock was really dry, which is great.
Yeah. And also I can't see any kind of blemishing on it, carbon on the side.
Yeah, it's good. Put it off. Just as I'm taking it off, you can see that some smoke is being produced.
Yep.
That's because I'm disturbing the fire. So I'll do it quite quickly. And it's just knocked the flames out. So now we're going to pick this up and just carefully pour it in the top. Quite loud. And what this is doing is it's producing steam that's cleaning the pores of the biochar. So it has a little purpose. Yeah. You can see in there now, you can see all the biochar. It'll still be quite hot though. So
It's still very hot.
there you go, perfect. And then I'm just going to let that cool for a bit, and then we'll see, once it's cooled down, I can empty it out and you can see all the biochar.
Cool.
It's hot in there, but you can hold that, so that's not hot anymore. So that's one of the fire lighters. So can you see how it's literally retained its shape?
Can I crush it?
Yes, yeah, of course you can.
What I'm noticing though, I'm not getting much residue.
No, yeah, it's very clean. So we quench it with water, so it's a difference in this kiln. Is that when you use water, you're using steam to flush the pores out.
Yeah.
So it will be a cleaner biochar than if you just let it go out naturally by blocking all the air.
Yeah.
Some kilns do that, then you don't have that steam and you don't have the quenching. I can't smell any barbecue now.
Yeah, so we're obviously having a smell.
Yeah.
I always smell things because
Yeah.
you can tell a lot by it from a smell of something. There's no smell at all to it, but what I like about it is, you know, the structure's still there.
Yeah.
But if I crush it together, normally what I was expecting was that I would literally have like a big stain of black on it, but you can still see the structures still
Yeah,
there.
it maintains its porosity, and like I said, that carbon's really inert. Like even microbes can't break that down. So mechanically, like with our hands, we're not going to be able to pulverize that. Some machines will mill it to a powder, and then you get into using it in filters, more water filtration when it's that small.
Yeah,
a bit like activated carbon.
Yeah,
but yeah, it retains its structure really well.
So for our viewers, if you haven't heard of biochar, this is me telling you that you definitely need to look more into this. Lottie, it's been an amazing journey for me as well as the viewers. Everyone knows your Instagrams, etc. Please look Lottie up, and I'm sure we'll be talking in the future.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers.